Hello and welcome. In this presentation, I'll be talking about process focus and strategies for change. Now, in process strategy decisions, we take decisions about process structure, about customer involvement, about resource flexibility and capital intensity. Now, all these decisions that we take has to eventually translate into some sort of design or redesign of the processes that currently exist in the organization. So the idea of process focus and strategies for change is basically to understand what are the ways in which organizations can decide how to come together with regards to all these different things that they have thought about for process structure, customer involvement, resource flexibility, and capital intensity, and then determine what the next process should look like. Now, to be able to achieve the competitive priorities that an organization has set forth, they have to ensure that their processes are focused on that competitive priority. So, hence, what organizations have to do is they have to focus in terms of their process segments within the organization. So, for example, within a company, you might have certain aspects of the processes that are more consistent with, let's say, in service organizations as a front office, whereas in the case of service organizations, some of these processes might be structured more like a back office. So, typically, you'll always have some of these different types of process strategies playing out within different activities that the organization might be doing, and it's important to understand what these boundaries are for these processes that are set up the way they are. And each of these different segments should be able to do their work somewhat autonomously. So, in manufacturing, that would translate more in the form of plant within plants. So, organizations might have different operations within a facility, and each of these different operations could have quite different individualized competitive priorities, processes, and workforces. There are organizations who have some of their processes, manufacturing organizations, some of their processes are using economies of scale to reduce the cost. Hence, the focus in that segment within their plant is on reduction of cost, and hence make to stock kind of environment is the most suited for that process structure over there. But then there could be some segment of these activities that they're doing which would require a lot more customization, and hence there you cannot rely on economies of scale and reduce cost, but more customized setting is needed. Like the example of Gillette razor blades, and there what you see is that their razor cartridges that they make, they can achieve economies of scale in the production of these cartridges, and hence that part of their plant which is involved in production of these cartridges can rely on a process which reduces cost and produces these cartridges in stock. Whereas the process which is involved in packaging these cartridges based on different requirements for different customers, whether it's the language requirements based on the region where it's sold, or the number of different cartridges that will be packaged in a certain packaging, that particular process has to be a lot more customized, and hence you cannot have an economies of scale kind of an operation. And hence you would see that within a plant they would have different operations which have its own individualized competitive priority, and therefore they would have process strategy for each of them quite differently. In service operations, similarly, we can think of it in terms of front office and back office autonomously deciding the way they would be setting up their process structure, setting up their customer involvement level, resource flexibility, and capital intensity. You see this very much in many of these large department stores who have now structured their layout in such a way that they have a space for, let's say, a certain brand which requires a certain kind of customization with involvement with customers, whereas a separate location might be there in the department store which is meant for a very different sort of product offering, which might not require that kind of customization. So this kind of change in structure within a department store where they have created these sub areas for different brands with different competitive priorities required to sell that particular brand or associated with that brand is in light of the competition that these department stores have faced from specialty retailers who were focusing on a specific kind of competitive priority based on the kind of product that they were selling, and department stores had to react to it because they were selling a lot more of different types of products. They had to ensure that within their single roof, they have all these different types of offerings with their specialized competitive priorities being targeted with the kind of process strategy that goes with it. In the case of focusing by process segments, what we also see is that many manufacturing organizations have reduced their size of plants. Instead of having very large plants that were set up in the past, they decided that these different plants can be broken down into smaller plants, and these plants can then be, instead of producing all kinds of products, they can be producing specialized products, and therefore they can gain the benefit of learning, the benefit of economies of scale, a more focused understanding of what they're doing. So that competitive priority and its linkage with process strategy can be much stronger by making smaller plants, focused factories, rather than having one factory which is more general purpose, making multiple types of products. So that's another strategy which you see in many organizations like HP, and as well as many other consumer durable goods manufacturers. Now, once we decide that we have a certain process strategy which needs to be implemented, and there is a realization that current processes don't really fit within that scope of things that we want to have, then there has to be a plan of action which can allow the organization to move to this next stage. And here we have different options available. One of the options is that of process reengineering. Now, this is a fundamental change that you're going to make to the process. It's a strong medicine. So here what we are interested in is a fundamental rethinking and basically taking a clean slate approach to radically redesign the processes so that it can improve performance in terms of cost, delivery, quality, speed, whatever you have as part of your competitive priorities. Now, when we do this, essentially it involves quite a bit of layoffs. It also involves a lot of investments, typically in information technology. So you see that these are highly publicized kinds of process changes, extremely expensive kind of process changes, which we read about in many of these stories about organizations going in a transformation. Now, the key elements with process reengineering is that it's very important to ensure that these reengineering efforts are focused on core processes, critical processes, rather than every process within the organization. Many of the other support processes can continue with the way they were, or perhaps go with something more like a process improvement rather than a complete change in the way they were structured. It also requires a strong leadership to achieve successful process reengineering, because ultimately there will be a lot more disruption in kinds of activities that an organization does, and leadership can then guide the organization in the right direction. Cross-functional teams are important as part of the process reengineering, because the kinds of inputs that are needed to re-engineer a process is not just one dimensional. There are multiple types of requirements that will come, and different functions might have different expectations, and all these expectations have to be incorporated as part of process reengineering. Information technology investments in these technologies are typically always going hand in hand with process reengineering efforts. Many times this information technology becomes the foundation for process reengineering efforts. And it's a clean slate philosophy that I just mentioned earlier, that you take all these processes as a starting point and then decide what might be the right way in which you can structure them, create a strategy for them that can help the organization achieve its goals, the competitive priorities that they have. And in these process reengineering efforts, even though they are fundamental rethinking, you still need these process analysis tools. You still need to have an understanding of pictorially how these processes are laid out and what are the potential areas in which changes actually can make some positive change to the organization. The other form of change that you can make to the processes based on your understanding of the need for change within an organization is that of process improvement. Unlike process reengineering, here we are not interested in completely fundamentally changing the process, but it's more a gradual change that we are embarking on. It's a systematic study of the activities and flows of each process and then improving it. So you understand the numbers coming out of each processes, understand what are the opportunities that exist, and then you keep incrementally making changes to the process so that it can do better than what it was doing earlier. So this would be something which would be happening on an ongoing basis multiple times with different processes, and organizations still use process analysis and other tools to accomplish this. So overall, in this presentation, I discussed the idea of strategies for change and the need for focus in terms of how you would make sure that all these different aspects of process strategy can eventually come together. Thank you.